Okay, it's coming really soon. Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to an exciting day of virtual talks and panel discussions. I'm Helen Fospero. I'm a journalist and broadcaster, and I'm absolutely delighted to be your host today. Our event is packed with industry leaders and innovators, brought to you by the team behind the leading independent news brand, Public Sector Executive. You may have been to one of our PSE virtual events already, or perhaps you're a new face in the crowd, but the team here is building an offering which is much more than just the usual virtual event. I think we've all been to plenty of those over the last 18 months, but here we're creating a real community. Alongside the great speakers and enviable opportunities to learn, there are plenty of chances to network and build new connections with like-minded thinkers across your industry. There's a wealth of knowledge on offer, and CPD certificates will be issued after this event, with 1 CPD point on offer for every hour of content consumed throughout the day. Appropriate perhaps then that today's event is all about learning and development in the public sector. We'll be looking at how we overcome the challenges ahead, upskill our workforce, and address the skills gap, and so much more. Our speakers come from local authorities, central bodies, and supporting organisations across the sector, and they really do offer unique insights and learning that could help you perhaps see a problem in a whole new light, find a solution you hadn't considered, or spark a whole new conversation. In the breaks between our speakers, you're encouraged to explore the platform and take advantage of the great features we've got for you on offer. We have something called speed networking, not dating, speed networking, available during the breaks, which you can access via the timeline, enabling you to meet someone like you every 3 minutes. Alternatively, you can search and connect with other delegates via the networking hub, with each method giving you the opportunity to network with your peers, share ideas, ask questions, and find solutions from people with aligned objectives to a face-to-face chat. And these aren't just connections for today either. Our is a community. The function to engage with these connections is there for you all year round, all through the platform. And for our brilliant partners who make events like these possible, we also have the digital marketplace. Talk directly to their representatives or download resources to share with your team later. Our system is built to give you all the benefits of a live exhibition floor, but without breaking the step counter. And if you're anything like me at these kind of events, getting lost a couple of times, I'm actually at home, so there's no danger of that today, hopefully. Now, whilst in the platform, your hard work making connections and absorbing knowledge doesn't go unrewarded. Alongside the chance to earn CPD points, we're pleased to be rolling out our exciting gamification tools alongside today's event. Make a connection with someone, earn 100 points. Easy. Attend a session, make another 50. Engage with one of our exhibitors in the digital marketplace or ask a question during today's panels. There are points available there too. It's all been carefully designed to give you that buzz about the learning and networking that you're doing while with us today. And there's the opportunity to make a difference with it too. Our gamification system has a leaderboard, and those who finish first, second, and third will earn a reward and help make a difference in the world. You have an option. You can either have a donation to the charity of your choice, or plant the equivalent number of trees. How cool is that? We're all about community and the environment here at PSE, and we know our colleagues across the public sector are too. So get out there and start earning points. As we get ready to hear from our first speaker, please do remember that throughout the day, we'd love you to share your best bits of the event across social media. Don't forget there, use the hashtag PSE365. That's hashtag PSE365. And let's see if we can get today's event trending and show what the public sector can achieve when we come together. So, on to our first speaker of the day, the Chief Executive of the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, Jacqui McKinlay. Under Jacqui's leadership, the Centre promotes and supports excellence in governance and scrutiny, working with a wide range of sectors, including local and national government, health and social care, education, housing, and the private sector. So please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Jacqui to your virtual screens.
Morning, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here today, kicking off your conference on what looks like going to be a brilliant lineup that you've got today. So as Helen mentioned, I work for a national charity working across lots of different sectors, and we really passionately believe in the role of governance and scrutiny and decision making. And the approach that we take is supporting organisations that are looking to innovate, lead the way, as well as supporting those that are dealing with a crisis or a service failing. And what I promise to do today is I'm not going to talk about lots of kind of geeky governance stuff. I'm going to talk about people, I'm going to talk about feelings, and we're going to talk about exactly why we need to be focused on learning and development throughout today. Now, what I want to talk about in particular are three things. The first is why I believe now is the best opportunity that we've had to radically change public services. The second is what I think we can learn from public service failures and whether there's a secret to preventing them. And then the third is about why diverse workforces and entrepreneurship and transparency are going to be essential for the future. So we've all been through an amazing experience, tragic, transforming, nothing that any of us have ever been through before, and hopefully we'll never have to go through again to that sort of scale. And there are some really big lessons that have come out of the last 15 months, which I think we as public service workers need to be integrating into our mission. There are three things I think that I'd like us to be able to think about today and why it makes it a necessity to change public services. The first is what we now know about inequalities and the impact that that has on outcomes. Now, inequalities have always existed in our communities before the pandemic, but have been thrown front and centre if you look at everything from hospital mortality data, those most affected by furlough and job losses, the digital divide, the skills gap, the burden that's been placed on women. We also see the devastating consequence of an unsustainable social care system. And more we're learning about the impact on education disruption and what's being called a potential shadow pandemic affecting our children in the future. And please check out Sir Michael Marmot for lots of information on social determinants of health, something that we all need to be having in the front of our mind. And this increased knowledge, I think, needs to be fueling our strategies, our policies, constantly asking ourselves, how are our actions going to improve outcomes for the people and communities that need it most? The second thing I think has come out of the pandemic experience is cementing the link between health and the economy. Prior to the economy, I felt like this was becoming a bit of a separate science. Talk of inclusive growth, social value, community wealth building, all really, really important initiatives, but sometimes felt like we needed to have special interventions in order to keep wealth, jobs, and assets in our communities. And I think what we've seen in this experience of the pandemic is the impact on health as well as the economy. That dual impact, instead of it just being about health or just being about the economy as it was previously. And the clear community, social, individual impact that's had. And our economic strategies of the future have to be centred on local job creation in those areas that need it most and for the people that need it most. So rather than a traditional approach to building our way out of crises, we need that focus on those sectors and businesses that will create jobs and opportunities that benefit all our citizens. And the third thing for me about learning from the pandemic is seeing the public as part of the solution. In one of the most centralised governments and governance in the world, in the Western world, we've been, brought up in a way where professionals know best. Policies that are created in Whitehall or the town hall will work in every community and with every individual. And we know that's not the case. We've had the devolution deals, creation of metro mayors, combined authorities, and we need more of that. But we also need to learn from the fantastic collaboration that's happened with partners and with the public during lockdown and the response, which provided a real live test bed for different operating models. We've seen in real time what works and what didn't work, what's best delivered nationally in a command and control model, what's best left to communities, how individuals and communities rose up, mutual aid networks to put in place responses more efficiency, faster, more targeted than any formal agency could have done. And we've also seen the shift into online democracy and on, working from home, which we're probably most of us doing now, which is enabling people much more, a wider group of people to engage in a way that they've never done before. So this centralized approach, we now need to be talking about community power, and these changes need to happen now. As I said, a necessity now, not next year or the year after. And the principles of community power are recognizing that communities have the knowledge, skills, and assets, which mean they themselves are able to identify and respond to the challenges they face. This already exists in some communities, most communities, flourished during COVID, influence and practice. And in that world, what we would see is this shift in language. Instead of being guided by metrics, guided by ethos. Instead of looking at the immediate, looking at the long term. Not working in service silos, embedded in the community. Moving from uniformity to a pluralist approach. And instead of being linear, being adaptive. And please check out New Local's website, and I'll tweet some links out as well for more information on community power and the community paradigm. So they're the reasons why we have to change. How are we going to go about doing it? I think there's a lot that we can learn from the high profile service failures and whether, how we go about preventing them. It's really important that we learn from these and use it to inform how we move forward. And for us, the ultimate indicator and foundation stone to any transformation, change, good work that we do, productivity, is culture. You'll hear a lot about it today, I'm sure. Every process and structure review that we're asked to do, come and help us work out whether we need this number of committees or whether this board is working. Every single time we quickly, usually the first conversation gets around to talking about relationships, communication, conflicting priorities, lack of clear accountability. And while structures and process and compliance are really important, it's how people behave, values that drive them, the way that we work that matters most. And we've taken a wealth of learning from organisations, particularly within local government, but also wider, that have been subject to some sort of improvement support. And that's enabled us to be able to articulate what good governance characteristics look like and the positive and negative behaviours that are associated with them. And that's allowing us to learn from the organisations that do it well, but also the experience of the Rotherham, Birmingham, Tower Hamlets, Kensington and Chelsea's, councils that have been through some really difficult times and supporting their communities through some really difficult periods. But also organisations that are currently on an improvement journey, Liverpool City Council, Nottingham, Croydon. And, whilst you might be sitting there thinking, oh, she's getting into dull governance territory now, and this has nothing to do with me. What we do know is that everyone plays a part in creating a culture where trusted relationships can happen, open conversations, we're willing to involve others, we're willing to kind of challenge ourselves and ask the difficult questions. So please check out the governance framework on our website, and there will be language in there, might be slightly different to how you currently work or your particular sector or organisation. But thinking about the health of your team, your section, your directorate, your department, how it works with partnerships. Thinking about whether governance is owned by everyone or it's seen as being just for those who've got governance in the job title and being about committee papers. how the organisation sets its goals and it looks to decision-making priorities, whether you do have clarity over roles and responsibilities, how the team's view of itself compares to the real what's happening. So, is it delusional? Is it defensive? A very important one we see a lot. Quality of relationships, whether we're able to navigate political and organisational dynamics. By carrying out these health checks of your organisation, by having conversations which are, how's it working around here? What does it feel like? How's it working from you? Do you know who's doing what? Do we have that clarity? Are we able to take risks seriously? Yeah, everything that's in there, that's the secret to avoiding failure. And even when the inevitable does happen, because things do go wrong that are uncontrollable or we can't mitigate, the organisation then is fit and resilient enough to cope with whatever is happening. And very often that's where the failure happens. Something happens, the organisation isn't in a position to be able to do that. The final point is around what does this mean for the way we lead, recruit, grow and develop ourselves and our teams. And really, to manage the challenges that we've experienced during COVID, we're now seeing how we keep that organisational culture fit and healthy is about the people that we have working in there and everything that you're going to look at today. And I think, the really important thing is thinking about that public skill base. In describing our best leaders, our change makers, our champions, our doers, however we might want to talk about those people, it's important that we are no longer talking about a policy expert, a program manager, a head of service, a specialist in a particular field. To build transformative workplaces, we need collaborators, networkers, conductors, facilitators, storytellers, people who can co-create shared visions and have got the bravery to consider letting go of power for those people who are better placed to deliver it. We no longer have the answers to the sort of questions that we're being asked to deal with around the environment, around creating social value, around kind of maintaining ethical standards. All of this, reducing inequality, is massive, massive challenges, and we need to be able to look outside. The second thing is around diversity, and I know this is going to be something that you talk about a lot today, and all the different activities you have. Diversity in our workforce is no longer an option. That's a given. They have to reflect the communities that we represent and that we serve, but also that's not just enough. It's not just enough to kind of have those people employed and have them on our boards. We need to find creative ways to get voices heard in the boardroom, open up decision making, and adapt our governance to enable this to dock and embed successfully. Now, doing this will feel harder and will feel more difficult. Having conversations with like-minded people is much easier than people who speak a slightly different language. But we can't carry on repeating the same thing, the definition of insanity, and wondering why we're not getting better results. We have to transform. And then the final thing is around a commitment to transparency. A commitment to transparency is a practical way to keep shining a light, keep that openness that we've experienced during aspects of COVID, and be open about the way decisions are made, how people can get involved, how do you hold them to account, and ultimately how we can evidence that everything we're learning from people and conversations is informing our decisions. And a final thing, just for me to hopefully sum up what I've tried to get across today. In transforming public services, creating a healthy organisation culture, having the right people, we can very often lead ourselves to think that there's a very technical answer and solution to the challenges that we're facing. And whilst aspects of it will be technical and challenging and need our professional brains and expertise, when we did the governance review of Kensington and Chelsea Council following Grenfell, nobody that we interviewed from the community, from the public, from community groups, from partners, elected members, staff and employees, nobody we interviewed asked for more governance. No one said we need more scrutiny committees or longer meetings, more consultation, longer response times, a clearer policy document or website. What they asked for was to be respected, to be valued, to be involved early, to be listened to be valued for the benefit, for the insight and the expertise that they bring. And what they were asking for was to be treated as equals. And I think fundamentally that's what we all want, and that's what we need to be striving for in the public sector today. Thank you.
Much for sharing that with us, setting the bar so high and really setting the stall out for the day. It was a really inspirational start to today's event. Now, next up, we've got our first panel discussing the challenges that lie ahead for public sector leaders and organisations. And we'll be exploring the skills that we need to overcome those challenges, from having a strong core leadership team to efficient data on who your people are and the skills you actually have available. There's a lot which goes into having a good, effective public sector team. We can only get to that point, though, if we're going to get the most out of our public sector staff and giving them the opportunity to grow, learn and shine. That could be through leadership, training or culture, or as the last year has shown, through technology. There are so many different routes public sector organisations can go down. So how do we make sense of the situation we find ourselves in and head in a direction that works, not just in the short term, but in the future? To help discuss those questions, I'd like to welcome our first team of panellists to our stage. They are Alex Thomas, Programme Director at the Institute for Government, and Francke, OBE, Chief Executive of the Chartered Management Institute, Andy Wright, Chief Executive of Braintree District Council, Trudy Birtwell, Director of Learning at SOLACE, and John Mark Williams, Chief Executive of the Institute of Leadership and Management. Our panellists offer us a real mix of experience across the public sector and are well placed to answer any of your questions during today's discussion. So don't be shy. If you've got a question for any of our guests today, please use the live Q&A option, which you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen. So welcome to all of our guests. It's very lovely to have you with us all. Jacqui said there that we have the best opportunity to change that we've ever had. John, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing the public sector leaders right now? John, are you hearing me okay there? Yeah. Hi, John. I just wanted to start with you, if I may, and ask you what you think the single biggest challenge is that's facing our public sector leaders, given the fact that Jacqui said now we have a great opportunity for change.
Absolutely. And I think the single biggest challenge facing the public sector is not knowing what talent to acquire for the future. It used to be the case that if you asked almost any organization, what's your single biggest challenge? They would say, I can't get the right people. I need the right people to do this. One of the challenges, the challenge I think facing the public sector now is that whereas the direction of demand and the direction of legislation were foreseeable to a degree in the past for the public sector. So the acquisition of talent was less difficult than it might be now. The pandemic has thrown out the playbook completely and has affected supply and demand temporarily to such an extent that I think the biggest challenge is we don't know what the challenges will be, so we don't know what talent to acquire.
Anne, would you agree with John there?
Well, actually, I'm going to agree with Jacqui. I think the single biggest challenge that the public sector faces is changing the culture. And it's about changing the culture to one of transparency, communication, engaging and involving others. It's those behavioral challenges. And when you do them successfully, our research shows that when you pay attention to culture, communicate clearly, have clarity and empathy, you are much more productive, you have much greater trust, and you can attract all kinds of talent.
And Anne, you've done a lot of work on that, haven't you, on culture change?
Absolutely. It is one of the easiest things to say and one of the hardest things to do because, and Jacqui did say this, it starts with behaviors. It starts with behaviors from the top. What we know from our research is that actually in the public sector, just as Jacqui said, being transparent about your actions is incredibly important. And so is the ability to admit your mistakes. And these are two things that people in the public sector need to get much more comfortable with. And when you do get comfortable with that, you build empathy and trust. You are more able to engage the communities that you're serving and working for and make them feel more respected and valued, which enables you to get far better outcomes.
Jacqui also said it was very important to have health checks of your organisation. She said that was the secret to avoiding failure. And Alex, that struck a chord with something that we've talked about behind the scenes, the importance of having really good data on who your people are and what skills they've got. I mean, that sounds quite obvious, doesn't it? But are we lacking on that front in a way?
Yes, thanks, Helen, and I agree. I mean, building on what others have said, I think it is hard to identify the sorts of skills that your workforce is going to need in the future. For all the talk of digital and data skills and technology skills, and we know that technology will augment a lot of jobs. That is hard to predict. I agree with John. I also agree with Anne that culture change is very hard. So in some of our work, we tried to dig into that a little bit, the Institute for Government. But the sort of first base, if you like, was almost getting the most out of the people that you've already got. So before you even start to think about acquiring new talent in a very competitive market, understanding the people in your organisation, collecting the right data so that you can deploy them correctly. That's not in some sort of command and control, highly sort of centralised way, but certainly looking at the civil service, it's really quite shocking in a way that managers, and to my experience in the civil service as well, that managers don't have the data that they need to be able to identify people with the right skills, deploy them in the right area, and that obviously makes the organisation less effective. So focus on the people you have and collect data would be my top line message.
Let's bring Trudy into our conversation, if we can. Trudy, you've been with SOLACE for the last decade, and you've done some work recently to have a better understanding of what the core skills and attributes required by local government and wider public sector leaders are. Can you sort of give us, in a nutshell, really, what your key findings were?
Yeah, and I think picking up on what Jacqui was saying earlier, Helen, she talked about roles like storytellers, she talked about conveners, she talked about relationship builders. And I think we found very much that it's not so much about the specialists anymore. It is about people who can bring that all-roundedness to their roles. So at SOLACE, we've been developing our CPD framework and a skills framework based on that. We focus very much on the leadership and management and things like you say, we've heard already, things about being authentic, things about really sort of walking and talking the actions and values that you mean, how we can really engage with people as well. And I think as others have alluded to over the last 15 months, that has really sort of changed itself and turned on its head. How do we continue to really engage with people when we're doing a lot of this through screens and less face-to-face as well? But I think somebody's talked already about bravery, and it is about how do we equip people to work in those complex and uncertain situations where the solutions aren't known. Jacqui talked about technical challenges, and we talk about sort of adapted solutions as well, very much helping people to deal with the mess, but also not expecting them all to have the right answers and be able to collaborate with others to get to those solutions, including the communities, obviously, that we're working with. And I think that's come to explore as well over the pandemic.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think empathy is high up there, as well as we've all been
Yeah.
adapting to these new working conditions. Andy, I don't want you to feel left out, because I've come to you last, and it's not last but least at all. Andy, you're Chief Executive of Braintree District Council. You know, we've been through some really challenging times, and I will, you know, talk more about the pandemic and the changes and hybrid working and things like that. But what current leadership skills do you think are really important in the public sector right now, perhaps against the backdrop of what we've all gone through over the last 15 months or so?
Yeah, good morning, Helen. Yeah, I think the last 18 months has been the most challenging. I've got 30 odd years experience in local government, and it's certainly been the most challenging I've had. But I think what it's also done is brought out the best of public sector. The response of not only my organisation staff, but also other partners has been absolutely exemplary. In terms of the leadership challenges, I think the first one for me is around that, Trudy mentioned it, about adaptive leadership. We were definitely moving towards a more collaborative style of leadership. But over the last 16 months, it has meant that actually at times you've had to be more directive. And also managing in that unknown has been a real challenge for all of us. But I think it's about that authentic approach, compassionate, right culture. We've got a lot of staff who are very tired, and actually we need to make sure that we don't just now think the pandemic's over and we now just throw more at them. We need to do that in an approachable way. I think we also need to think about what it's meant for politicians. It's been a really challenging period for them, and so therefore there's a real challenge about how do we create that new vision for the organisation and for the place going forward, and how do we work with our partners. There's been some real step change in working with partners, certainly increasingly with the health system. And I think we need to grab that with both hands and make sure that we build on that and don't just go back to where we were before. But I think for me, the biggest issue is about creating what that vision is going forward, the storytelling about where is it we want to be, and how do we bring politicians, staff and partners with us on that journey and find that joint collective vision going forward. Has got to be one of the key things. And the final one, not to be boring, but innovation and resources. How do we actually deal with the ever-tightening public sector purse and bring innovation and commercial approach where appropriate to generate income or reduced expenditure to balance the books, to allow us to keep delivering what our public expect?
Let's hear from John about what you think, John, is and isn't working in the public sector today, and where we need to do more work.
I think the danger here, because there's an old saying that there's a solution to every problem which is simple, elegant, and wrong. And I think we're in danger of jumping to the conclusion that the solution to the challenge of the public sector at the moment is to have the right leaders in place and to have the right characteristics in those leaders. And I think one of the challenges that the public sector faces at the moment is not differentiating between context and character. We constantly emphasize too much the character of leaders and forget about the context. Remember, we talk about wartime and peacetime leaders. We talk about good times and bad economic times and stuff like that. I think there's a need for us to recognize that the immediacy and high impact at the front end of the pandemic was radical and instant. The long tail of post-pandemic is the exact opposite of that. It will not be radical, it will be iterative in the way that we see changes happen, and it will be quite a long time, 2 years or more, before we see the impact of the pandemic on the way that leaders actually need to operate. So I think the issues like empathy, compassion, bravery, these are vital elements in leaders. Actually, we shouldn't forget that it's the context in which those characteristics are being deployed which will determine whether or not they are actually effective. And Trudy's point about adaptive leadership, it's not adaptive to anything other than the context in which leadership is being delivered. And I think we don't have enough conversation about the importance of context.
Do you agree with that, Trudy?
Yeah, I do actually. And I think all the learning that we do, particularly when we're trying to develop leaders, that's a critical point. Unless you put it into the real context, then the learning doesn't happen. And it's how you actually take this stuff forward and apply it. Most definitely, John Avery.
And Alex, it's how you take it forward and apply it, isn't it? But also how you build those multidisciplinary teams so that you've got the right finance, project management skills, etc. as part of that.
Yes, I think it is. I mean, just picking up on the point that John and Trudy were saying there, I think the part, Andy mentioned it as well, actually, part of the context is, for public sector leaders, is politics and political leadership. And so almost not being afraid to be a small p political actor, not becoming a sort of politician yourself, but operating in that context and having the confidence to act in a way that is conscious of the political context is really important. So that wasn't quite your question, but I thought it was worth emphasizing that. The point about multidisciplinary teams, again, this comes out of my experience and our work at the Institute for Government, is how important it is for leaders to be able to knit together all of those different skills. In the civil service context, people often talk about policy civil servants or the sort of policy profession, and actually we've tried to unpack that a little bit and talk about what policy is. And there's a world in which civil servants are policy, there's a group of civil servants who are policymakers, but there's a sort of natural bias in the civil service to turn those policymakers into leaders of multidisciplinary teams. And my view certainly would be that it doesn't have to be like that. And the public sector should open itself up to drawing leaders more from all those different disciplines. And what the core job of leaders is to think about who is in those teams, so that they can both sort of serve up options for politicians to decide, and then implement those decisions, particularly in a civil service context, as I say, which is what I know best.
And we have all been living in unprecedented times over the last 15 months. We've, here just in my home, this is my home in Shepherd's Bush. It's also my office. It's been where my children have been doing online learning. My husband's been editing under Jack's bunk bed. It is a high bunk bed, by the way. It's not on the floor. But, we've had to adapt in many different ways. The pandemic's brought big changes to the public sector. I'm just wondering what skills and behaviours you would direct leaders to prepare and to develop their management skills so that they can successfully lead a team where many of whom are probably in the future now and in the future going to be, doing hybrid working, as we seem to call it now.
Yes, well, it's a very important point. And what is true about hybrid working and what is true about leadership, and I do agree with the point, is that you have to take the context in which you're doing it very seriously. So when you are in a hybrid situation managing a remote team, you really do need to work much harder to engage with people. You need to work much harder to stay in contact with them. And as you begin to do that, you have to be very mindful of their personal circumstances. So you actually have to take their context much more into account. So for example, if you are managing homeschooling as well as working, and there was a time when we were doing that, some people had to manage that more than others. Women disproportionately had to manage homeschooling. And being aware of that is very, very important. As we come back into the office, we have to be very careful that we bring back in a diverse fashion, because if we just allow everybody that wants to come into the office, we'll end up in a situation where we will not have that diversity, and there will be two camps, those in the office and those at home. And we mustn't make those at home feel that they are left out. So it's about being very inclusive. And so, for example, if you're having important meetings where you're making important decisions and half of the people are in the room and half aren't, you should really consider using tools like this, because we were all in the same size box. So we all felt involved. I think it's very important that we don't create two classes of people, those in the office where the action is and those at home, because that will disadvantage certain groups. And create more inequality, not less. And that's not what we want as we build back better.
I mean, in a way, it's nice to think, isn't it, that perhaps hybrid working, which we'll explore later on in the day in more depth, but will perhaps give us all a bit more, I don't know, a bit more quality of life, a bit more, you know, when we are working from home, take that tension away. We can make the sports day, or we can deliver our child to school. I know I'm in a freelance capacity, but I found in a way I've worked even harder from home because my home has become my office. But Andy, has a different approach, do you think, been needed, and have you seen that where you are?
Yeah, I actually see it as a massive opportunity, actually, to recalibrate the way we work. You know, I've 30 years of kind of worked in the same way, perhaps had the odd day working at home. And we're certainly in our organisation having a conversation across the whole organisation about what hybrid working actually means for us. I've got a meeting with my management team this afternoon with their first thoughts on how they want to design it for their service, because it will be different for each service. At one end of the spectrum, we've obviously got our waste service and so forth, which clearly they have to be at work to deliver. But we've got other services that haven't been in the office for 15 months. And it's getting the message across the organisation that it isn't going to be a blanket approach, but it is a real opportunity to have a new way of working that I think will provide improved work-life balance for everybody and will allow people to design their work around their life circumstances. So it's a conversation, and we've clearly said that we're going to have a 6-month kind of pilot process where whenever we can go back to work, which is now looking as though it's going to go back. You know, we start something, but recognise that we will need to change it. We'll get things not right in the first place, and we need a 6-month basis to actually see where we are at the end of those 6 months. But I think it's a real massive opportunity that we need to grab with both hands.
Just flipping back to Anne briefly, because it's just come into my mind with what you were saying there, Andy. I mean, presumably every manager and leader, Anne, should be thinking about resilience and mental health and well-being. That should be right up there when considering one's hybrid working options that work for the individual and the team.
Absolutely. CMI's research shows that the number one ask of managers and leaders was to consider the well-being of their staff. And yet we know that a lot of organizations don't have mental health on the same par as health and safety. I think this pandemic will change that, and well-being will be a major factor in management and leadership. And just to underscore that I completely agree with what Andy said, we have a massive opportunity to improve how we work. And if we just restore factory settings, we are missing the opportunity of a lifetime. So we must continue this flexible, life-centered approach, individual approach to how we lead and manage people.
Trudy, let's bring you in there as well, you know, because I know you're very big in that sort of field, mental health and well-being. And what can public sector leaders do with that, you know, with their own teams?
I think one of the first things, Helen, is that they really have got to develop their emotional intelligence around this stuff. They've got to be able to pick up the signals. They've got to sharpen the antennae, particularly if we, you know, continue in this sort of hybrid working environment. So I think that's the main thing, really. But also about, like you say, spotting those differences in behaviours. It's how they can then sort of act on those as well, and make sure that they are aware of what sort of signposts and help that can support that can be put in place to help people in that situation. I think just to add to that as well, what we've increasingly been finding in SOLACE, even with our sort of leadership and management training, is that those informal opportunities to have some of those conversations, both in the office but both in sort of a learning environment, have disappeared to a degree. So people are coming into sessions like this, being stretched, but not necessarily having then the opportunity to sort of unpack some of that stuff and analyse it. So we're certainly looking at ways at how we can sort of create some of those opportunities as well. But make sure that you have those informal conversations. That's what I'm saying, not all about work. And watch the productivity levels and the length of days that people are working that you alluded to. You know, make sure people take time, take stock, and take some breaks, and do that yourself to model it.
Do you know, I always admire people that can turn their emails off and not reply. I apologise to all my panelists because I've probably emailed you all weekends, all sorts of times of night and day. Before we take some questions, we've got a few minutes left for questions, and I can see some coming on there. You're going to have to forgive me. I'll have to put my glasses on because I can't actually read them. But John, I just wanted to finish off before we sort of throw it open to the floor with, we've got to remember, haven't we, that people are at the heart of all these thinking and actions. How does the customer, how do we, the sort of public, fit into everything we've discussed so far today?
It's a huge challenge for the public sector because, as Alex mentioned earlier on, there's more than one customer for the public sector. Very clearly, there are policymakers, there are line managers, there are the public, us, if you like. And I think one of the crucial things that came out of that for me was this idea from Trudy of emotional intelligence, the need for us to adopt a sort of organizational emotional intelligence and display that to the public as the customer. And I mean, we can do it for our teams. Andy's example of a 6-month pilot is a sort of organizational demonstration of emotional intelligence. We're going to try this out and see how people are. One of the challenges, I think, for the public sector is to say, how do we do that for our public customer? And it's not easy. The adaptability, the resilience, the need to identify who the customer is at any given time in any context, there is no answer to that, I think. And this comes back to the character of the leader.
Absolutely. Now it's appropriate. We've got about 4.5 minutes left. Let's take a question. I'm going to throw this open, so whoever you feel is most appropriate. That's probably not great on a virtual event, but let's have a go. Gail McGurgan says, how have panel engage with staff in a creative way when staff are working from home?
Oh, well, we've done all sorts of things at CMI, and actually we're very pleased. We were our staff engagement scores have gone up. We were rated the second best not-for-profit to work for in the Best Companies survey, and I think a lot of that is because people have felt looked after. We've sent them gift baskets regularly. We've given them mental health days off. We have lots of coffee and chats that I do with random people in the organization. We're finishing at 2 p.m. on, we're calling it Summer Fridays, to recognize that people have worked really, really hard in this pandemic. And then there are lots of fun activities, Pilates and quizzes and all sorts of things. So I think people have gotten really creative, cooking contests, pet contests, and it's delightful to see. We've gotten to know each other better. And I think that is a real benefit of this pandemic. We've all become more human, and we've gotten to know each other better as people.
Andy's nodding. I'm just wondering if you joined the Pilates class there, Andy.
Believe it or not, we had a conversation yesterday about who from management board should join our Pilates class, but which has been part of our mental health. We've appointed mental health champions across the organisation and been to support staff that way. We've similar to Anne, we've given time off for staff. We've run 2 staff surveys. We did one around June last year, and we've just run another one in February, March time, just to regularly take stock of where people are. And similarly, we've got greater engagement. I run quarterly all staff briefings. Attendance of those has doubled. Because it's more convenient for people to do it, and they can dip in and out. So we've found actually engagement is better, and across has been better, and it's now about maintaining it, because I think the challenge is there was a clear challenge for us all just to deal with the epidemic, and I think now that's over. I think everybody's kind of a huge sigh of relief, and I think it's about making sure we keep focus over these next 6-9 months is going to be a key issue for us.
Keeping focused, and I think all trying to take some positives away from what was a difficult time. I mean, the positives were even, weren't they? Getting to know your 90-something-year-old neighbours and doing their shopping and watching your children engage with them. I think there were a lot of positives, and I think we have to focus on those. Graham Arnold has a question. What's the role of formal leadership qualifications in changing the culture and responding to the new challenges? I'm not sure who would be best served to answer that one.
I'll dive in if I may, and say something that's possibly controversial, certainly for Anne and certainly for my organisation as well, actually, because we're both involved in leadership qualifications. There is a feeling that the future belongs to skills, not to qualifications. And that feeling is growing in many of the organisations that I talk to. My response to that is, yes, absolutely, skills are vital, because you absolutely need to be able to deliver skills. Skills are things that we actually can do. Qualifications, though, are an indication of skills, some skills. So I think the role of the future role of leadership qualifications, I'll be very interested to hear if Anne agrees this, is about being selective about the qualifications dependent upon the skills that we as individuals and organizations decide will be needed in future.
Yeah, I do agree with that, John. And what I would add is that the assessment process that we undertake as part of these qualifications is highly reflective, and it's also done in context. So, for example, if you do a chartered management assessment, you have to reflect, what have you done? How have you led and managed change in your organization? How have you led and managed your teams? What have been the concrete outputs? So it's a real opportunity for you to reflect on exactly how you lead in your context as a leader. And, you know, if you are a manager, you are also a leader. Everybody has to have a leadership role in their organization.
We have 2 minutes left, and I'd like to give those to Alex, if I may, because I feel like I've abandoned you for the last few minutes, Alex. But I'd just like to explore in that 2 minutes or minute and a half what the future workforce looks like and how it's going to be changing, obviously, with our greater reliance on digital and technology and the greater role that plays in all of our lives.
Thanks, Helen. Not ignored at all. It's been brilliant. I think this goes back to slightly where we started, and I think John maybe said something about we can't know exactly what the pandemic is going to change and what it's going to entrench. I think we can know, though, a certain amount that skills there'll be at least 2 massive buckets of skills requirements, one on technology, digital data, and another on people and relationships and getting the most out of people. And so those are the 2 areas I would focus. And actually I can see the clock ticking down, but to pick up on the point about qualifications, in the civil service context, the areas where there's been more success have been with that sort of slightly harder edge with some qualifications there, not taking away from the broader set of skills that public sector workers have, but signifying them and giving a little bit of a sort of a sharper nudge on that. So I think that should be part of the future as well.
Well, that was a fantastic first discussion. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure we could have carried on much longer. Thank you for all your support behind the scenes as well, with briefing me as to what you've all been up to. And thank you for joining us today. I want to thank Alex, Anne, Andy, Trudy, and John for their insights and their words of wisdom. I hope it's useful for you. It is time now for our first networking break. And as I mentioned in the introduction, this is your opportunity to try out our speed networking functionality or to explore the platform. For those of you who may have joined us slightly later, there's also a meeting hub where you can connect with other delegates. And as well as the meeting hub, we have a digital marketplace exhibition floor with experts on hand from our event partners to help you tackle a range of common challenges. Remember, this is a perfect opportunity for you to be growing your contacts book and exploring the platform and earning points. Could you be our winning delegate come the end of the day? We shall see. Explore, connect, and inspire one another. Our next panel discussion will begin in about 10 minutes time, I think. So if you can return to the timeline in 10 minutes and join the next session, I shall see you then. Thank you.